over a period of time, I reason not all of the rules apply to me. So I wouldn't tell you, nobody wakes up, as we said, that says, today I'm going to go to prison. It's this very cliched slippery slope of bad decision making without holding myself accountable, without getting advice from mentors over a period of years. And it was this singular pursuit of growth and advancement and prestige and money without considering, how my actions were putting me on a path to utter destruction.
Welcome to Breaking Stereotypes with Todd and Tootsie. Today we are joined by Justin Paperny, who pled guilty to securities fraud and spent 18 months in federal prison. Justin owned up to his crime, paid back every dime, and is now an author, speaker, and federal prison consultant through his company, White Collar Advice. Today, Justin will attempt to break the stereotype of white-collar criminals and their motivations. But before we get started, I'd just like to ask our viewers to like this video and subscribe to our channel, as it will help the YouTube algorithm and help our new channel to grow.
Welcome, Justin. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me. It's funny you mentioned paying the money back, because about 37 minutes ago, I got a call from someone who's been home from prison for like 6 years. And he's like, how do they expect me to pay all of this money back? They're hounding me. Mm-hmm. It's very difficult to pay it back. It takes time. But I'm grateful that you mentioned that, because it doesn't come out a whole lot.
Of course. So let's start, Justin, with what do you think the stereotypes are of white-collar criminals?
If you were to look at white-collar criminals, people default to greed. Greed certainly is a symptom, but it's not the whole story, of course. Many white-collar crimes are facilitated by people who aren't making millions of dollars and flying on private jets and traveling on yachts, but rather looking to pay their rent or their health insurance. Or they are forced in a corporate culture, in their opinion, to cross the line to secure their paycheck. So the corporate culture oftentimes compels people to cheat. So part of why everyone on our team encourages people to learn to tell their story is so they can debunk misperceptions that people may have about white-collar crime and encourage them to tell their story in an honest and believable way. If you look at White Collar Advice YouTube or TikTok, every now and again, you're going to hear someone say, hey, that's Bernie Madoff. That's Bernie. You're never going to get away from that. And you shouldn't try to change everyone's perspective or opinion, but you do need people in your network. And you do need people to understand what you did and what you didn't do, which is why it's so important that criminals like me are debunking misperceptions people have. It all starts with storytelling.
Great answer. But I'm curious if you think that the stereotypes are fair.
There is no doubt that there are some people, the lion's share of people in federal prison did not wake with intentions to break the law. I mean, who wakes up and says, today's the day. I feel like ruining my reputation. My wife's going to leave me. My kids are going to visit with me in prison. I'm going to lose my license. Today feels like the day. The majority of people did not have bad intentions. There are some people, however, and I've been to enough sentencing hearings where judges will tell a guy, you're a bad apple. You continually break the law. You're going to continue to break the law. You've always broken the law. You do fit the stereotype of a white-collar, greedy, entitled, arrogant criminal. So certainly some fit that mold. Most, however, do not. The problem is if someone's not looking to change that narrative, they're going to be swept into the camp of you're just a born criminal, born bad.
Okay. Without getting into too much detail, we'd like you to briefly explain to our viewers about your crime. You're working as an investment banker and were involved in a fraudulent hedge fund that was part of a Ponzi scheme, correct?
That's right. 6 years into my career, my business was made up of, I was a money manager for professional athletes. So I was a baseball player through USC. I did not play professionally, but a lot of my early clients were teammates of mine from USC. So I would spend my time going to spring training and traveling during the year to get clients, baseball players. We also began to execute trades for hedge fund managers on an unsolicited basis. In other words, Tootsie would call and say, hi, I'm the hedge fund manager. Buy 10,000 shares of Microsoft. That was her decision. As the broker, I simply executed the trade. I tried to get you the best price, and I earned a commission. 6 years into my career with several hundred clients and several $100 million under management, one client of ours who had a hedge fund worth $6 million came to UBS. Our hedge fund manager lost the money. He then raised more money. our suspicions at UBS told us, what investor in their right mind would give money to a hedge fund manager if they knew that he just lost every dollar that he had? And we were culpable because we were executing the trades. We were getting paid heavy commissions. So he raised more money and he lost more money. It just continued. In time, our suspicions were confirmed when I attended a meeting, and I directly heard my client, the hedge fund manager, tell a prospect of his that my client said that he was earning a rate of return in his hedge fund that was fraudulent. He said, I'm earning 27% a year in the hedge fund. I knew it was a lie. I knew he lost every penny. Rather than tell this investor, don't give him your $5 million, run, get out, please, I just chose to keep my mouth shut. I turned it the other way, not realizing that not saying anything in many ways is giving credibility to my client, the hedge fund manager. Right. So initially, it was just what the government would call willful blindness, turning the other way when I knew a fraud was taking place without question. What really made matters worse and why so many defendants get themselves into further trouble, once I learned that I was a target of an investigation after the FBI showed up at my home, rather than just tell them the truth, yes, I earned commissions on a fraudulent hedge fund. Yes, I turned the other way for commissions. Yes, I realized he was lying to his clients. And I eventually attended a meeting. Rather than tell the truth, I sort of feigned ignorance. I said, well, he's the money manager, not me. He recommends the trades, not me. I just execute the trades, not my responsibility. He raises the total denial, deflecting, feigning ignorance. And when interviewing with the FBI, I lied to them. They had evidence contrary to what I told them. That, of course, is obstruction of justice. Now it's a new charge. So I do what so many defendants do. It's like I just doubled down and made matters worse. And in the end, turning the other way, lying to the government, led to my accepting an offer to plead guilty to one count of conspiracy to commit fraud. And in April 2008, I surrendered to a minimum security camp for 18 months.
And as you just said, people like yourself never initially set out to commit a crime. You didn't wake up and say, this is the day. You've openly stated that it was a failure of ethics and morality on your part. My question is that rampant in the industry, or were you an outlier, or is it rampant and you just happen to get caught?
I think it's rampant. I don't want to indict all investment advisors because the lion's share of them do it perfectly. There's no question. Regardless of the pressures they may face, they do the right thing and they don't seize criminal opportunities. So the lion's share do it correctly. There are some who succumb to an aggressive corporate culture or who are convinced that because of their production or their background, and because they don't know anyone that's ever been to prison or jail, that they can act with impunity, sort of consequences be damned. So they just don't ever think it can happen to them. And if you go down this path and act inappropriately long enough and you get away with it, you become conditioned to this behavior. You just think you're going to be fine. What I have found is it is pervasive in that the lion's share of people who cross the line, to your point, didn't have bad intentions. Yet once they start, it's very hard to stop. And oftentimes they go accustomed to the lifestyle. And there's studies that suggest the further someone may be removed from money, the higher they may be to cheat. In other words, a white collar criminal wouldn't go into a 7-Eleven with a gun and say, give me the cash. But when you get into collateralized debt obligations from the mortgage meltdown, hedge funds, even crypto, the further removed you are from the actual cash, the easier it is to potentially cheat. And I think you see a lot of that in the mortgage, the banking, the crypto type industry. And people oftentimes find an opportunity and they seize it, like with payroll protection fraud. We've had probably 20 of those clients at White Collar Advice. None of those people were ever immersed in the system. Yet when the market imploded and the world shut down and their business was struggling, many fabricated on these loans to get the money. In a million years, they never would have imagined they would have been in prison, yet COVID came. So it's usually just circumstances present themselves and some seize it and trouble follows.
In your book, Lessons from Prison, you talk about the fraud triangle. Can you explain it and how easily people can fall into it?
I can. So there's this triangle: pressure, rationalization, and opportunity. So as it relates to my case, for example, I faced I received $1 million bonus with my partner to go from Bear Stearns to UBS. So I felt pressure to prove worthy of that bonus. I saw friends of mine at UBS getting let go, ostensibly for ethical violations. That was nonsense. They weren't producing. Pressure to prove worthy of the bonus, pressure to bring my book of business over from Bear Stearns to UBS, pressure to continue this lifestyle, pressure to pay the tax obligation that came from getting this bonus. Like I'd have to make, I think it was like $12,000 or $13,000 a month before I saw a penny, because the first 12 or 13,000 went to pay the taxes on a 60-month basis. So just pressure to keep the lifestyle. Then we began to rationalize the only way we're going to be able to get our numbers up is by working with this hedge fund manager who we knew to be dishonest. Why? There was a major change in the brokerage industry. I was a trading stockbroker. What I mean is, on $1 million account, I may be able to trade $40,000 to $50,000 in commissions, not just by looking to generate commissions, just by trading 4 to 5% a year. When I went to UBS, there was a shift in the industry where they didn't want brokers like me trading. They wanted us to move the account to a fixed fee of like 1%. So now my income is going to go down by like 70% because I'm going from 4% on an account to 1%. So we begin to rationalize, if we don't find a way to get our numbers up, they're going to let us go. And we began to rationalize they treat you differently based on how much you produce. So we have the pressure to keep the numbers up, rationalize this is the way the industry works, get your numbers up, consequences be damned. But to close the triangle, you need an opportunity. You can't get there without the opportunity. Mm-hmm. And the opportunity was June 16th, 2002, when Keith, the hedge fund manager, called and asked if we could take his $6 million in the hedge fund. We did. And within a few months, he was doing $100,000 a month in production. So as I've said before, everyone feels pressure. Some people rationalize that pressure. You can only get into trouble if you seize an opportunity. That's the fraud triangle.
Wow. And obviously you have personal responsibility and you've owned up to it, but do you feel you were groomed and sort of like rife for that opportunity?
It's interesting you mentioned that, because an hour ago, I put up a TikTok video that addressed the first time I cheated in business. And it wasn't illegal, but I cheated. And at the end of that video, I think I say, my branch manager encouraged me to do something that I knew was wrong. And I did it. And to qualify for a $10,000 bonus, I never thought of it till my sales manager presented this opportunity to me. I'm like, that's ingenious. I did it. I made $10,000. At that time, I thought I can get away with it. I thought that I was treated differently because of my background or pedigree. And over a period of time, I reasoned not all of the rules apply to me. So I wouldn't tell you, nobody wakes up, as we said, that says, today I'm going to go to prison. It's this very cliched slippery slope of bad decision-making without holding myself accountable, without getting advice from mentors over a period of years. And it was this singular pursuit of growth and advancement and prestige and money, without considering, how my actions were putting me on a path to utter destruction. I groomed myself by failing to educate myself on business and ethics and finance after graduating college. It was all of my own making.
Do you think it's a threat of going to prison, a deterrent for people in this industry? It's known as Club Fed for a reason.
So many people can't even fathom. I mentioned this when I opened some lectures. So many people can't even fathom becoming immersed in the criminal justice system. So it's part of the reason some of them immediately tune out when I begin speaking, because they're like, oh, we got some dude out of jail speaking. I don't know anyone that's been to prison. I can't relate to this guy. And I remind them of that. So there have been times 2 minutes into a lecture where there's a guy drooling and sleeping in the front row. And I'm like, I don't blame you. I'm not upset. I would have been you too. You can't imagine going to prison. So you're going to tune out and sleep. Perhaps you should better understand the consequences that can follow succumbing to temptation or pressure. To the Club Fed aspect, I hear it every day. I won't dispute there are parts of the experience that are relatively easy. But in the white-collar crime world, the easiest part of the sanction is prison, because it's clearly defined with a beginning and an end. The hardest part is coming home and starting over, or to the idea of your podcast and YouTube channel. It's breaking these stereotypes, the perception that an employer is going to have, or a woman, or a spouse. I mean, I remember some of my first dates after federal prison. One woman flat out said, "You just got out of jail. Like, do I have to buy my own dinner?" Right. So there are these, and I wanted to initially say yes because it's $18 a wine glass night apparently. And that was but the point is, the hardest part is coming home, and we want to make sure that people are prepared for that. But there are some club fed to it, and that's okay.
But you still, sorry, I wanted to interrupt, but I just had to bring this to our viewers because I thought it was kind of entertaining. When you first got to prison, you tried to shake one of the guards' hands because you're just...
Well, that's what you do. Like when you meet someone, you're like, "Hi, I'm Justin. Nice to know you." So I walked in with my mom and brother, and I reached out to shake hands. And I said, "Hi, I'm Justin. I'm here to self-surrender." And he gave me a look like, "You're the dumbest guy we've seen here in a long time." And he said, "I'm a correctional officer. We don't shake hands with inmates." And I'm like, oh. I told my brother, "Get her out of here," meaning my mom. I'm ready to get into prison. Yeah, so that was the first of many mistakes I made in prison.
And we'll definitely touch upon that because I know that's part of your business is preparing people, and you obviously learned the ropes yourself and you're passing that on. But I do want to focus on the consequences a little bit more and just ask you flat out: do you feel like the punishment fits the crime? Because so, for example, in your case, I believe it was a rabbi that lost millions of dollars. It's just these types of white collar crimes, people oftentimes lose their life savings, their retirement. And you served 18 months. And I'm sure you've heard this before, but, do people feel like you got off easy?
There's no question that some people feel the sanction is not severe enough. I tried to articulate that I feel the 18 months is relatively easy. That is off-putting to victims if they knew the way that some people could serve time in a minimum security camp. They take pleasure, victims do, when they know the lifelong consequences that accompany it, for irrespective of the prison term, right? The employment, the licensing issues, the embarrassment, the shame, the public pillory, the reputational fallout. You're a doctor, lawyer, executive making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. You come home to pick up phones for minimum wage or scrub toilets and showers in prison. So there's no doubt if people only fixate on the length of a prison term, they're going to be left wanting or frustrated. If they look at the lifelong consequences that accompany it, they would probably feel differently about it. It's interesting you mentioned the rabbi, because in Lessons from Prison, I address how I attended a meeting where a rabbi who invested in the hedge fund was lied to, and I perpetuated that lie. And that was a significant, again, that was another opportunity for me to do the right thing. When I attended that meeting, and I don't want this to sound like a rationalization, but it's important. When I attended that meeting, and the first time I met that rabbi, who was an investor in my client's hedge fund, his money had been lost for years. That rabbi's money had been given to my client before my hedge fund client was even a client of mine. It had been gone for years. So when I attended that meeting, the rationalization I told myself was, this guy's money has been gone for years. Nothing I do is going to bring it back. Perhaps I can help my client. This is the rationalization. This is the fraud triangle. Perhaps I can help my client buy some more time to try to make the money back. That's how I allowed that meeting to continue. That's how I facilitated it. When in reality, the pressure was I wanted to keep the commissions coming in. I rationalized, I rationalize if I tell this elderly rabbi his money's gone, it may kill him. I don't want that responsibility. And the opportunity was the next day when my client called in to do a trade. So you're right. And I can tell you, thankfully, all of his money was repaid like everyone else, but it doesn't replace the pain and loss of dignity that many of them feel. And we encourage people who have created victims, first and foremost, to identify with victims in an authentic manner, rather than just focus on how your own life is imploding, which is a huge mistake. That's when you fall into the stereotypes of being a criminal. Narcissistic, it's all about you. You didn't mean to do it. You didn't have bad intentions. It's not about you. It's about the victims you created. And that takes real work.
So who in, let's talk about your case. would be responsible for paying the money back. And how did that occur, given the fact that I'm sure the hedge fund manager did his own time?
So certainly, without getting into all of the details, because we'd be here for 7 weeks, and I don't want to put your listeners to sleep. Suffice to say, UBS Compliance was involved in this conduct. They were aware of the hedge fund manager's losses, millions. Every month he showed up on the monthly activity report for complex trades and the losses. And frequently we had discussions about this hedge fund manager, ways that we could protect ourselves so the commissions would continue, but we weren't responsible for the losses. So UBS was complicit. So you're right, the hedge fund manager had no money left. When the jig was up, so to speak, investors began to call UBS, my branch manager, to say, is our money safe? What's happening with this hedge fund manager? The investigation concluded all the money was gone. All of them, of course, sued UBS and me, the hedge fund manager, my partner, my assistant, my dog, any and all who was attached to this case, they sued. And in the end, you're right, my client had no money left. It was UBS and me who were responsible for paying back the nearly $9 million that was lost. And it took me 8.5 or so we paid back at sentencing. I still owed like another 500. And it took me until 2018 to pay in full. And I should note, even the lawyers who got a third, I think, of the settlement, we paid their fees as well, meaning that the people who lost money wouldn't get less because of that. So thankfully, UBS had deep pockets, of course. Mm-hmm. At the time, I had deep pockets, but they weren't as deep after writing the checks and the lawyers, the lost earnings, the reputational fallout, things that bring pleasure to victims I help create, and I understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and you make a good point that UBS was complicit, and yet they just paid a fine, and you went to prison.
You can't put the UBS logo in prison, right?
Uh-huh.
And part of what, if you look at the mortgage meltdown from 10, 11, 12, and 13, part of the reason so few CEOs went to prison is, what is their argument? Well, I'm managing a huge organization, tens of thousands of people. I can't be responsible for what every executive is doing, right? Some go rogue. So it was hard to pin. Now, my compliance manager, the branch manager, several people were fired. They weren't culpable and criminal to the degree that I was, but certainly they were culpable, and they knew, and they all lost their jobs. In fact, I don't think any of them ever worked in the industry again. But it's true, you can't put everyone in prison, but those at the top, upper management, have these layers. And then there's the guys like me doing the day-to-day work. So it's going to be my texts, my emails. It's all, my hands are all over it. And for these corporations, it's easier to write a check. And frankly, they build in settlements and payouts like this into their budget. So it's just part and parcel to them doing business, right? And you look at settlements from Goldman Sachs and UBS and Bank of America. Goldman Sachs, one time, they paid like a $476 million fine. It was like 2 days of profits. It's just built into the model, right? Mm-hmm. But someone's got to pay the price to go to prison. And if anyone from UBS should have gone to prison, it should have been me.
Well, one way you break the stereotype is that you've decided to not run or hide from your conviction. Can you talk about why you decided to own your mistake and take the path you have?
I had a mentor, Michael Santos, who served 26 consecutive years in prison. When I met him, he'd been in for 22 years. He went in for a drug crime, served 8 years in the penitentiary, got an undergraduate master's degree, was a prolific writer from prison. I went to prison. We formed a friendship. And he asked me what I was going to do when I went home. And I'm like, I don't know, I'll just return to real estate. And he's like, well, aren't you going to lose your license? And I'm like, yeah, but I was convicted as a securities broker, not as a real estate agent. And he said, you should begin to give more thought to the consequences of this conduct and really understand the fallout and what it is you can and cannot do. And that's going to require you to think differently. You need to understand your story. You should talk openly about it. Because at that time in prison, I heard so many men regret how they prepared for sentencing and prison, and they hated their lawyers, and they were depressed and lonely, suicidal. And I felt that way. So I knew to be successful, I'd have to think differently and embrace this underdog mantra, and I was an underdog for the first time in my life because I was convicted and in prison. So it was sort of like, I joke, it was like that Seinfeld episode with George Costanza where he did the exact opposite of everything. That's what I began to do. I began to write a blog with Michael's help from prison, writing about being in prison, lessons learned. my day-to-day experience. And initially my family was like, we're begging you to stop writing. Please just get this behind you. Don't talk about it. Move on. This doesn't have to be your life. And I appreciated what they were trying to do, but they didn't understand it. They didn't understand what I was seeing. And frankly, this was an opportunity for me to help people, for me to contribute. And it all started with telling myself I got to understand my story, share it, and think differently, and become very public about this. And I felt real value sharing lessons learned. It felt good to help people from prison, right? It's like my body's in prison, but my mind was free to work and contribute. All of that started because I said, I will shatter these stereotypes of running from it, pretending it didn't happen and blaming others, and owning it, talking about it, and addressing everything. The privilege, I had it. Entitlement, I had it. Some greed, I had it. Every opportunity in the world, I had it. Knew right from wrong, yep. Own it. And if you can own it, at the end of the day, people are going to say what most say to me, you've learned from this and you're better because of it. This is now my best asset professionally, outside of my family. Professionally, my best asset is my experience through the system and what I've learned. And that would be the case whether I did real estate, marketing, consulting, mitigation, writing. I continue to get offers to go into fields that have nothing to do with prison because people can see there's value there. It all started by thinking differently, not running from it.
You mentioned earlier that the hardest part wasn't actually doing the time, but returning back with this destroyed reputation. So what is it really like? How does someone who committed a white-collar crime rebuild their life? I imagine it's very hard to get hired if you've been a proven liar, cheater, stealer, right? And I imagine the white-collar path is really hard coming out.
You need a network, right? You need a network. You need something that our team stresses really through our nonprofit prison professors and through white collar. You need to develop your communication skills, how and why you got here. People don't want excuses. At the end of the day, people care mostly about themselves. How can you help me? So you've got to be able to demonstrate how you can be of value to others. But while your network may shrink and while you may get ostracized by many, there are always going to be people willing to stand beside you. Look at someone about to get executed on death row. They have some people on their side of the aisle supporting them. So you've got to nurture a network from prison. Life will be measurably harder after prison if you've wasted the experience. So to your question, what do? We encourage them to get a pen and paper. Now there's email in prison. There wasn't even email when I was there. Pen and paper, send an email, send unsolicited letters, or reach out to the people that are in your network. Let them know how you will prove worthy of their love and support. And you want to measure the growth of that network. Then in time, you demonstrate what you've learned and how you could be of value to their organization or whatever it may be. So the network is crucial to thriving after prison, but too many guys get into trouble and they just go dark. It's like they go in a hole and they ignore their network. And it's very off-putting. You serve 3 years in jail, you get out, and it's like, hey, I just got out of jail. Long time no talk. Will you hire me? Like people, they're going to be like, you haven't changed. You're using me. You're opportunistic. Where have you been? Don't do that. But that's what people do. They're like, oh, I'm a felon. No one will hire me anyway. Very much the ad hominem. I'm a felon. I'm a criminal. Okay. So it's thinking differently. You've got to nurture relationships from prison, prove worthy of an opportunity, and work harder than you've ever worked before. And it requires humility and potentially doing a job that is beneath your skill set. But it's part of the journey. In Lessons from Prison, I wrote about a prisoner with whom I was friends who I kind of began to ignore because he made fun of a prisoner about to get released who was going to have a job at McDonald's. And he's like, I'd rather stay in prison than work at McDonald's. It's like, you're the stereotypical greedy white collar defendant. I don't want to be friends with you anymore. It's terrible. How could you not congratulate him for lining up this job from prison? What is wrong with you? Mm-hmm. So it requires a different way of thinking and potentially. I picked up phones when I came home. I was a receptionist. I went from making $500,000 a year selling real estate to picking up phones for $15 an hour. Part of the journey.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. So typically, what kind of job options are available to people just getting out of prison?
Well, thankfully, there are some people with felony convictions who are able to get licenses, though in the white collar world, it's kind of few and far between, especially if you owe restitution and you're on probation. So many of our clients, they have to become entrepreneurial. They start businesses. So we encourage our clients to develop marketing skills. Right? Many clients of ours have wives or spouses who have very successful businesses. Let your spouse be the hero, help build and develop that business. For example, we have 4 clients right now, and the real estate market's beginning to shift with higher rates and inventory. We have 4 clients right now who are in prison, from Montgomery to Lompoc to Sheridan to Yankton. All 4 of their wives are real estate agents. And we've encouraged our client, use your time in prison to grow their business that supports your family. Learn marketing, Facebook, Google. Help your wife learn what TikTok is to create 30-second videos about listings that she's had. Make her the hero. And so you're like a marketing arm from prison. That's how you're growing and developing the business. Prior to that conversation, they were like, I'm going to go and run and play softball all day. And hey, my wife's on her own. No, there are real responsibilities, things that you can do from here. So marketing, becoming an entrepreneur. There are so many things that are possible. Yes, the ability to get a license is probably, gone for a while, if forever. There's a lot of people that thrive in America without a license, but you got to develop a skill set in order to do it. But marketing and just business management has really been very popular for our clients, or supporting the spouse's business.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You mentioned how hard it was to start dating when you got out. And so I'm curious, do you also advise people on how to rebuild their personal lives? I imagine there were tons of relationships destroyed with family, friends, significant others. So how do you kind of manage that side of getting out of prison?
Humility and honesty, right? It does no good to blame and excuse your conduct. It really requires, you got to practice. You got to do the work, right? It's like that TikTok video that went viral where you found me. That was 3 minutes, but I've been doing this for 14 years. You got to do it in 30 seconds, 3 minutes, 3 hours. I've done it over 2 days while teaching. So it requires you got to be aspirational. You got to lay out a vision of, yes, I did this. This is who I was. This is who I'm becoming. Ride with me. I can make this happen. Let's do this together. That's much better than, well, I'm a felon. I didn't mean to do it. The government kind of screwed me and I hate my lawyer and I got a raw deal and prison was really boring. I don't want to talk about it. And it's like, my God, that's not exciting. Nobody wants to be around that, right? So rebuilding relationships, we are human. We make mistakes in life. We can overcome, but it's not going to be, as my partner Michael says, through happy talk or cliches or platitudes, but by work. And people always see if you've done the work, right? I mean, there were guys in prison who would call home and say how great they're doing. And then the family would come and visit and the family could say, well, you're not great. You're lying to us. You're disheveled. You're angry. You're mad. Like, what do you do here all day? That actually led to some problems with my blog because I was writing about how productive you can be in prison. Some wives or girlfriend read the blog, sent it into their loved one. They're like, why aren't you doing what this guy is doing? It actually led to some problems that would be interesting to film separately. So it requires accountability and just really letting people know this is how I'm going to become better. And as humans, we make bad mistakes and we forgive, but you got to prove worthy of a second chance.
Your company, White Collar Voice, prepares people for life behind bars, as well as life when they get out. What do you say to the people that might say you're helping the criminals, not the victims?
Yeah, I approach it differently. So, for example, the government. This came up a lot with the Varsity Blues. So in my office, you see like Washington Post and LA Magazine, CNN, a lot of the work our company did in the Varsity Blues case with these parents who paid to get their kids into school, right? And I was on CNN and Allison Camerata is like, tell me how you're not helping, the privileged get out of prison early. And it's like, well, that's easy to jump to that. Our approach is this. The government has endless resources, our tax dollars. It's their job. If you had $1 billion to fight a case, it wouldn't match what the government has. I believe, sure, I'm jaded. I believe the government at times portrays an image or narrative of a defendant that is not factual. We encourage people to understand the stakeholders. The prosecutor is someday going to be a defense attorney making $1,000 an hour. And the way they get that wage or bonus is by showcasing cases they caught in the past, like me. So I think we send too many people to prison. I think the sentences are too long. Many of these cases should be handled civilly, not criminally. But with respect to helping rich people or anyone buy their way out of prison, I approach it from this perspective. We're just simply trying to equal the playing field. The government has endless resources, and we think they paint a narrative that's not always right. We're going to help them tell a story that we think mitigates and shows a different side. We're going to ask the judge to take the totality of our client's life into perspective rather than this little snippet, rather than this window of time where he went rogue and did bad. Doesn't always work, but I think it would be malpractice. I think it would be inappropriate to not try to change the narrative. And unfortunately, while most defendants embrace that, they outsource too much of the work to lawyers. So let's say, like, my lawyer does that. That happened last week. We had this New York Times article, and a defendant called, and he's like, great article, but my lawyer does that, right? It's like, no, your lawyer's paid to say why you're worthy of leniency. If you're a bad dude, guess what your lawyer's going to say? You're a good dude. If you didn't have bad intentions, if you had bad intentions, you know what your lawyer's going to say? You didn't have bad intentions. We think judges discount it to a degree because the lawyer's paid to say it. So we want to help the defendant tell that story. Without that, we think they're at a significant disadvantage. So I'll never, till the day I die, I won't believe that mantra, we're helping rich people get out of jail. To the extent that we can make it a level playing field, we're going to, and we do.
Okay.
Can you still tell the story of the rapper that you worked with? Because I thought that was super interesting.
Fantastic guy, mentor to me. His name is Stanley Benton, goes by Stat Quo, came from Atlanta. What could have been a huge rapper, chose to go into production and producing with some of the most incredible artists. I spoke with some of them. I won't mention whom, but he's awesome. Stanley reached out because he was named in an indictment in Texas regarding something with American Express miles or traveling miles or something like that. Some of his co-defendants had gotten 24 and 30 months in federal prison, was looking at prison time because so many people were in the indictment and everyone had gone to prison. So when he reached out after watching some of our YouTube videos, he said, hey man, I can do jail, I can do prison, but I just don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have happened if I didn't prepare. I should have done this, I should have done that. He's like, I just don't want to have any regrets. So I don't care about the money. I don't even care if I go to prison. I just want to know I did everything properly. And I said, will you be honest? Will you be authentic? Will you tell us everything, every detail? Will you be vested and involved? He said, brother, I'm going to give you all I got. I got kids. I want to do the right thing. I made a bad decision. I want to own it. And the judge appreciated that. He was prepared for his probation interview. He was prepared for his sentencing hearing. And because of that, I think even the Times attended Hugo Mejia's sentencing. He's in the article. The Times didn't attend Stanley's in Texas, but they got the transcripts. And I think when Stanley told them the interview that the judge said something like, why are you even here? The Times wanted to confirm it. And they actually got the transcripts from the sentencing hearing and they saw for themselves. The judge said, like, why are you here? Why should you even been prosecuted? I think he told the story in such a beautiful way that shows, one, he should not have been prosecuted to begin with. What a waste of taxpayer resources. And he did a good job. I will say, even if he got sentenced to prison, he, for the rest of his life, would be able to maintain, it's okay, because I did everything I could to prepare. And the irony is those are the people that tend to get the best outcomes.
Mm-hmm. I also want to give you the opportunity to explain another reason why you have said you help criminals. You told us this separately, was essentially that if people are locked up forever and they're not rehabilitated, they're not really able to help the victims and society in the long run. Can you explain that a little bit for us?
The longer we expose someone to this system of corrections, the less likely they are to succeed on the other side. So it's hard to, if a defendant tells a judge, I want to make amends and pay my victims back, it's impossible to do so unless you have a career path to make money and actually pay them back. If not, it's just nonsense. Judges mostly look at it as nonsense. You're telling me what I want to hear. So to the extent that we can help people be productive in prison and work hard and create a realistic path, it serves so many ends. One, they won't have a life after prison of depression. They'll feel fulfilled in what they do, and they'll be able to earn some money and fulfill the obligation they made at sentencing, which is pay the money back. And the more successful they are, the less likely they are to reoffend. There's so many benefits that come with preparing, but the longer someone is away, the more accustomed they become to corrections and the harder the transition is. And we see that through our nonprofit Prison Professors, which creates programs in prisons and jails across the country. Prisoners going through those courses, they're serving 10 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years in prison. And if you don't see the value in work, if you don't have goals upon your release, you're just going to go right back.
What do you say to the people who might say white collar criminals had privilege before prison and they still have it after they get out? For example, money, education, connections, where, some of the people, like, for example, we had a young black man on here who, didn't have any connections, no money, no education. And after he got out of prison, he needed to go back to street hustling because he didn't have anything before and didn't have anything after.
So I don't know the story or him, but when I hear he had to go back to that, that's a choice to go back to criminal behavior. Okay.
True.
He didn't have to do that. I hear that in the white collar crime world as well, to the idea. And I know that because there are people like we profile Helene Flowers at prisonprofessors.com, who is just commissioned to do artwork for the Queen of England, who was sentenced to 2 life sentences in prison. And due to his advocacy and going through our programs in prison, came out, mentored by the owner of the Golden State Warriors. There'll be a TV show. He's an artist. The Queen of England, I just mentioned, he was in prison for 2 life sentences for murder, and he was able to advocate and get out. So I believe it's a choice. So the idea of privilege, there's truth to that in my case. I can't speak for everyone, but I got to own that. I did have privilege. I did have opportunity. I did have blessings that I took for granted, blessings that many people in prison never could have imagined. All true. And rather than defend it or excuse it or claim that this is made up due to what's happening in our culture, it makes more sense to tell the truth. It's true. It's part of the reason that I never should have gone into the system, because I knew better. I took shortcuts. I got caught. But I want to address it. It's absolutely true. And I'm aware of it. And all I can say is it's true.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever thought about, or do you do any pro bono work with people kind of in, again, for maybe drug crimes and that aren't in kind of the white collar system, but, more of the mainstream system?
I'm so glad you asked that question. That really made the interview for me thus far. Thank you. Prison Professors, it's all free. So White Collar Advice is the for-profit brand. But everything really at White Collar Advice, we give away for free at Prison Professors. 1,000 videos, books, blogs, podcasts, interviews with judges, wardens, subject matter experts, prisoners who talk about it's all free. Some people choose to retain us through White Collar Advice. The biggest sponsor of Prison Professors is White Collar Advice. Revenues that we create or bring in helps grow the nonprofit at Prison Professors, and that work leads to content in prisons and jails all across the country. So as we film this podcast right now, at least 100,000 people in California prisons are going through our content at no cost to them. It's all free, driven by money we raise or revenues that White Collar Advice sends to Prison Professors to create that content, to give it to the people in prison for free. There are some people, when they know that it's free, who call us and say, I want to work with your team. I can do it on my own, I suppose, but I'd like to work with you. I'd like the intimate one-on-one service, and we're here. And admittedly, those fees range from a couple of $1,000 to $250,000 and everything in between. But we make clear at all times, we give away all of this work. Some choose to work directly with our team. And if there's work or writing a book or mitigating, there's real time there, and we're going to get paid for that. But I'm so grateful that you asked that, because the lion's share of what we do, we give it all away for free at prisonprofessors.com.
That's great. And you definitely come across as very remorseful, and I think you've shown that, throughout this interview and in your videos and in a lot of the work you've done. But I guess my question is, how do you know the difference, or, have you worked with people and you can say, these guys are genuinely remorseful for what they did, and these ones are sorry they got caught? And can you talk about the difference?
That's why you need time to build a track record. I mean, I even see that on some of my TikTok. How do I know you've changed? Well, that person, there's a library of content online of giving stuff away for free, of mentoring. When I came home from prison, I spoke for free for a year to hundreds to businesses, to universities for no fee. I just wanted to share my story. Now, the cynic would say, yeah, you weren't getting paid, but you were honing your skill set as a speaker. Okay, you're not going to make everyone happy, right? So what I'm conveying is, if you look at someone over a period of time and the track record they're building, someone's either going to say, you are remorseful, or you only said it because you got caught. I embrace the cynics, because there are people that will say, well, it's in your interest to talk about prison. It's in your interest to go on TikTok or YouTube to film videos why I went to federal prison, because it may help your business. I'm not going to be able to persuade everyone the motives that I have and why I do it. If I went to sell real estate or raise money or do marketing or do anything, I would still continue to share the consequences that follow cheating, the consequences of white collar crime, and what it truly takes to make amends. And I would ask anyone to look at the body of work that's created. And of course, no one's going to do that, but a simple Google search could show steps that I've begun to put in place since surrendering to prison to become better and stronger and overcome my own bad choices. Are there some people who say, I'm sorry, only because I got caught? Yes. Are some of those people our clients? Of course, because we've had thousands. But also, you have to understand, many people I don't think should have been prosecuted, and many people plead guilty. I'm not a conspiracy theorist here, so don't get crazy. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people, I think, plead guilty because the odds of prevailing at trial are so low, and the trial tax or consequences of going to trial, if the odds of winning are like zero, zilch, if you can even afford it. Mm-hmm. So there are too many people, in my opinion, who plead guilty, who are not guilty, or it should have been handled civilly. So for some of those people, they have a right to say, I pled guilty only because I got caught, because that's the only reason. Or they should say, I pled guilty only because I couldn't risk going to trial. And there's more of that than there should be.
Mm-hmm. One of the articles that I read about you, or you had written, it talked about an obscene amount of plea deals that are made. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it was in the 90s percentile?
That was in the that was in the New York Times article. It was 98.3% of federal cases plead out. Right. So look at it's hard for a jury to view you objectively. Your name versus the United States of America. When you talk about a stereotype, they see that, they think this dude's guilty or she's guilty. That's hard to overcome, especially sometimes the money if you're a postal worker, you're a school teacher, and then you see someone making several $1 million a year. Some people presume they earned that or got that in part because of cheating. Then you hear what the government has to say, and it's game over. So in our opinion, too many people are forced. I hate to use the word forced because there's a choice. Just the odds of prevailing are so low. To that end, we had a client that went to turn down a deal of probation. They told him, you plead guilty, you're going to get probation. Maybe you get a year of home confinement, but we're going to recommend probation. He says, no, I'm not guilty. They said, great, go to trial. But I didn't do it. Great, go to trial. He loses, he gets 63 months. It took him like 12 minutes for the jury to convict him. It clearly wasn't that severe of a case because the government offered him probation if he took a plea deal. Mm-hmm. 63 months by going to trial. I mean, who would make that? Very few people would make that choice. Mm-hmm. I think that's the reason the statistics are so high and so many people plead guilty.
So what do you hope is the greatest takeaway from people who hear your story?
I want people to I want to be careful about saying that people need to change. I needed to make changes. And unfortunately, I didn't make some changes in my life till I was sitting on the wrong side of prison boundaries, wondering how I ended up here. My father, I love him the best, but a little overweight, loved the Dodger dogs. I'm going to a Dodger game tonight. Didn't decide to improve his diet till he had both knees replaced. Close friend of mine, about 3 years ago, caught cheating on his wife. She left him. Finally wants to go to therapy after the wife finds out. Right? Oh, I should have done it sooner. Waits until he gets caught to try to make a change. I don't want people to wait until something so severe happens that they make a change. If they need to make a change, work on it now, because it's the habits we cultivate that will get us there. Like, I love the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's like, get 1% better every day. So I'm not saying anyone needs to change, but if you do need to make some changes, don't wait till you get that punch in the face, till my dad has the surgery or your wife leaves you, or I'm in prison. So there's the preventative aspect to what I'm trying to do. But also, if you are in this system and a government investigation there's a path and plan to emerge successfully with your dignity. But it's going to require very hard work. It's going to require working on days you'd rather just stay in bed or not even brush your teeth, right? Days you'd rather go jump off a bridge. Mm-hmm. It requires doing work on days you don't want to work. And I hope Michael Santos, Larry Hartman, Sam Mangel, Brad Rouse, everyone on our team demonstrated how they did that. And there's no better testament than Michael, who did it through 26 years in prison. Lastly, I'd say I want them to find perspective. People in life have endured worse. Mandela did 27 years in prison. And you look at what people have, and you look at what innocent families in Ukraine are dealing with right now. I mean, people have endured worse. So find some perspective and challenge yourself. I became competitive. Could I do it? Can I make it? That was kind of fun to find out. And I want people to try to draw those same lessons.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for coming on our new show. And to our viewers, if you think Justin broke a stereotype, please leave a comment below. Again, I really thank you for coming on. It was very insightful.
I appreciate the opportunity. I don't sell any books. They're all free. Of course, I don't have one close by. Here it is. Mm-hmm. If anyone ever wanted a copy of Lessons from Prison, it's free. Literally sell you nothing. All they have to do is go to whitecollaradvice.com, put in their email to get the book. It's free. It's probably something they could get through in just a few hours. But I really derive value of providing as much helpful content as I can. And congratulations on your podcast, your TikTok. I look forward to seeing it, contributing in any way I can, and I'm very grateful for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
and
you.
Where should people look to find you?
A couple of ways. White Collar Advice. If you go to YouTube, White Collar Advice. TikTok, I've begun to use over the last few months. That's been fun, a different sort of engagement than YouTube. So TikTok, White Collar Advice, YouTube, White Collar Advice, the website, whitecollaradvice.com. We have blogs, we have podcasts, books that we give away. So there's a ton of content out there if people are inclined to learn more about prison, the consequences of cheating, and steps to overcome making some bad decisions.
Thanks so much, Justin.
Thanks so much.